RAMONA from Germany, also known as Mo, I'm sure there's a really interesting story there, I look forward to hearing it, works in quality assurance at SCHWERING for almost 5 years and is an ambassador for Cypress end-to-end testing. Today, Mo is going to take us through flaky tests and fighting in nightmares. We've all been there. Unreliable tests are always a nightmare for anybody. These flaky tests brought Mo many nightmares, and to help us get out of this hell, or to prevent us getting into it in the first place, Mo's going to share their experiences with writing automated tests. I've seen Mo speak at Web Engineering in Palma a couple of years ago, so I'm really looking forward to hearing you speak again. Over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm so glad you share your time with me here at CityJ's conference. Well, I want to talk with you about a nightmare I struggled with for years and years. I want to talk about flaky tests. I hope that my experience can be helpful to you, fighting those nightmares and being more confident if you encounter them in the future. So let's begin with it. At first, I want to introduce myself to you. My name is Ramona. I'm working as developer core at SCHWERING. SCHWERING is providing an e-commerce, open source e-commerce system. And before working as a developer, I was one of the people taking care of quality at SCHWERING, especially taking care of the testers. I love to automate the routine tasks of the testers to enable them to focus on the more important tasks where we actually need the human and their creativity and knowledge and experience. When working at test automation at SCHWERING, I want to show you the framework we use for automated tasks. This way you have a little bit of context when I am talking about flakiness in the next slides. When it comes to backend unit tests, I use PHP unit. When thinking about front-end unit tests or component testing, we are using Jest framework. And when it comes to end-to-end test and UI testing, we are using Cypress. This is important to know because of these reasons and my focus on front-end development. My examples in this talk are often taken from Cypress or Jest tests, but the tips I want to share with you can be used in all frameworks, all unit or UI or end-to-end or integration tests. So I hope you're not worried about that. Well, let me tell you a little story about a boy who cried wolf. There was a boy protecting and taking care of a flock of sheep who repeatedly tricks nearby villagers into thinking a wolf is attacking his town's flock. When bored, he called the villagers for help. There was a wolf, there's a wolf, help, help, only for them to be disappointed when noticing that there is no wolf at all. And they leave, of course. When a wolf actually does come and does appear and it is attacking the sheep, and the boy again calls for help, the villagers believe that it's another false alarm. And yeah, as a result, the sheep are eaten by the wolf. The main learning of this story by Aesop, you can see in this quote, a liar will not be believed even when he speaks the truth. As you see, there's a wolf attacking the sheep and the boy is shouting for help. No one believes him anymore because of all his lies. And so this can be applied to testing as well. Aesop's story is a nice allegory on an ugly pattern I stumbled upon. This ugly pattern are flaky tests, flakiness, and all the stuff. Flaky tests are tests who fail to produce the same result each and every time the same analysis is run. So basically, I mean builds who fail occasionally. One time they pass, one time they fail, next time they pass. I think these flaky tests are a huge problem because those results of your test will give you no information about your product as you cannot trust those results anymore. In addition, they are expensive to repair, often requiring hours or even days to debug. And as a consequence, they jam the continuous deployment pipeline, making the shifting of your features much more slower than they need to be. Well, as I started to work in test automation in the beginning, I hear this quote quite often from the developers who notice a failed test, and it is a huge red flag to me. This quote shows me that the error is not taken seriously and that the assumption exists that flaky tests are no real error, just flaky, no need to debug or care or think about at all. Because after many retries, they will work again. And in my opinion, this is a worst case scenario because if such a change is merged into your product, you will have a new flaky test to begin with. Well, as we now know the problem of flaky tests, we should start to inspect the causes of it to find a counter strategy. So let's see. The first possible area of causes I encountered can be found inside of your tests. May they be not that particular well written, containing wrong assumptions, or relying on bad practices. In the following slides, these are the most common ones I encountered, but that might not be complete. Let's discuss about the other you experienced after my talk here at the conference or something. I would be glad to hear about your opinions. Well, the first pattern I saw some quite a lot, I think, were hard-coded ideas. In an ideal world, the starting state of your application should be pristine and 100% predictable. But of course, in the reality, you never know that the ID you use in your test will be the same in the new installation, in the new build, or something like that. So keep that in mind when working with IDs. You need to be 100% sure that the ID will stay the same. Another thing I encountered flakiness in were randomized or generated demo data. Of course, you would say to me, maybe it's a legitimate flaw because you know that it's generated and you can react to it. But see it that way. In my experience, as I was working with Behat and PHP end-to-end tests, I worked with an application and generated demo data. And if a flaky test occurred, I couldn't be sure if the flakiness was in the demo data or actually in the test or in the project. So it was really hard to debug for me when flakiness appeared in this environment. So please think about that. Another point which caused huge pain for me were tests with cross dependencies. Think about tests who cannot run independently from one another, relying on the data of previous tests or something like that. Or think about previous tests interfering other following tests because there are some leftover data or an incomplete cleanup or something like that, causing causing failures in the following tests. You don't want to debug that, trust me. Let us begin with incorrect assumptions. My, so to say, favorite one, incorrect assumption about time. I noticed some people and myself before as well using inaccurate waiting times. For example, the usage of a fixed sleep timer. I think about, I'll let the test wait for a second or something. And this can cause problems because in the best case, you will wait too long, causing your test to be much slower than it needs to be because your application is already ready to proceed. In the worst case, you won't wait too long. You won't wait enough. And in this case, your application is not ready, causing your test to fail when your application is under load or has some other reasons to be slower than you expect it to be, causing flakiness. Another small incorrect assumption can cause flakiness as well. I'm talking about incorrect assumptions about the order of data, the order of entries when working with a listing or something like that. So please don't assume your data comes in the order you need. All right, let's start with the second area of causes why flakiness can occur in your test. I'm thinking about environment-cited causes. With environment-cited, I mean CI-related, Docker-related, or failures of dependencies outside of your tests. Anything you can't get your hands on that easily because it's in the DevOps responsibility or even a third-party dependency you cannot control. First, and the most obvious cause of flakiness in this area are resource leaks. If your application gets underload or the memory consumption is higher, you have a missing cleanup, or just using quite big tests, all of that can cause more memory consumption and resource leaks, causing your test to fail when this load is happening. My least favorite error in CI would be flakiness because of incompatibilities between dependencies. My pain was back then when I worked with Nightwatch as a testing framework that it required Chrome WebDriver or other tools to run. I had this requirement using Chrome as a browser, Chrome WebDriver through Nightwatch and Nightwatch. And as there was an update to the Chrome WebDriver where Nightwatch couldn't keep up, I had flaky test fails. That was painful. That was really painful. So I don't want you to experience this. So keep it in mind. In the area of dependency failures, I want to include NPM issues in general, for example, permission issues or just NPM being down. This can be a cause of flakiness as well. Well, this is not a cause at all, but a thing to keep in mind. You need to keep in mind that when working with end-to-end tests, you are using the full application stack, and this can cause some side effects. The more involved, the more error potential there is. So that's the reason I think that JavaScript tests are most difficult to stabilize, just because they cover large amounts of code, including more error potential. All right, last but not least, the area of actual bugs, the product-sided causes, and the area we really need to be cautious on, because sometimes if you fix a flaky test, the fix is in the app itself, in your product, and not in the test, as Sam Safran said in one of his blog posts. I'm referencing here to sporadic errors in your product. For example, a race condition in your application or something like that. Think about that. If 1 of 5 tests catches a bug, think about how many customers will encounter this bug in production. So I beg you to take those flaky tests seriously, because they can hint you to an actual bug in your application. All right, so we now know the 3 areas of causes for flakiness. Let's base our counter strategy on that. In my opinion, team is the most important factor in this equation. So please start an honest discussion with your team about flakiness and get its commitment. That's most important. With that, arguably, the most important first step is admitting that you have a problem, and as a team, afterwards, deciding how to confront it. There were 4 strategies I saw in my career how teams dealt with flaky tests. Well, let's inspect them, let's see them, and let's think about its usefulness. Starting with the first one, deleting the test and forget about it. Well, of course, as you don't need to fix the bug in this occasion, it will save you money, but it's at the expense of losing your test coverage and potential app bug fixes. Never forget that the test you want to delete was there for a reason, and by shooting the messenger, you will just hide the symptoms of the problem underneath, not solving it. So I don't want to recommend this strategy. Well, the second one would be running and retrying the test until it passes. Well, again, in this case, you won't have the need to fix your test or your bug in your app. So I think that this solution is quite lazy. And in addition, it will slow down your test suite as valid failure will be rerun as well, making your test suite really slow. So I also don't want to recommend this one. Third one, just doing nothing and accepting that your test is flaky, as you know, okay, it could be that it sometimes fails. Well, similar to the first two, it's no solutions because you don't take care of the problem underneath. And your test was there for a reason and doesn't give you any value now at all. So what's the point of this strategy? My favorite one is the strategy to quarantine and fix, which means basically that you skip the test and have the test suite keeping reminding you that a test was skipped, so you won't forget to actually fix it. Well, of course, as long as you skip the test, which has no value for you because you cannot trust it, you will lose the coverage temporarily. But don't forget that with the fix, the coverage will come back as well. So I think this is the most useful strategy. Well, as you now start to fix these tests, I want to recommend you to run your test in a loop in order to uncover the flakiness in it. For example, think about running your test 50 times. And if it passes all the time, you can be sure that your fix is working. And if it doesn't passes every time, you have at least uncovered the flakiness and can inspect it more better, getting more information out of your build and something like that. Another strategy, which is one of my favorite ones and I love to talk about it, is keeping your tests isolated. The most important thing is to have a good cleanup. For example, cleaning up your installation, restore your clean installation between your tests. Plus, I think it's useful to only test the workflow you want to test and to mock or create the test data just for your test itself. This has another advantage. It's a shortcut, so your test will be much more faster if you are using shortcuts or create your test data via API or via a mock or something like that. This way, no side effects will come from other tests or interfere with your test. There won't be any leftover data from other tests, and your test can run independently, even if you want to run it in random order. This wouldn't be a problem for your test suite. This is a little example I took from Shopware, where we want to log in as a customer in the storefront. When thinking about a login, you need a customer, but the creation of a customer isn't part of the login process. So I want to use a shortcut for that. So let's look at the example. I want to start with the before each hook, which is a hook which will be executed before every test. And there, my first step would be a reset to clean installation. In our case, to use MySQL dump, but that's another story for another topic. Afterwards, when the application is at a clean state, I want to create the test data specifically for the test itself. In my case here, for the example, I create a custom of API, and then I can start with the test itself and the login workflow. Well, when thinking about counter strategies for flakiness, I advise you to optimize your test structure, beginning with an easy one. Use smaller tests. The more you test, or the more you do in your test, the more can go wrong and the more memory will be consumed. So try to keep your test as simple as possible and avoid to use too much of logic. Another point which you need to keep in mind when working with Cypress is that Cypress commands are queued while Vanilla.js is not. So you can run into timing problems when you don't keep that in mind in your test structure, test creation. Well, the next counter strategy is quite controversial, I know. And don't get me wrong, I still think that it's an anti-pattern to retry a test until it passes. But there might be a case or two where it's actually okay to use retries. When thinking about if you cannot influence the error or the cause of the error, for example, when you need to exclude errors from external dependencies or from third-party solutions, it might be okay to retry the test. But in either way, please be careful when using this. Don't get blind to it and use notifications so that you are being reminded that the test was retried. When you want to do it, I brought a little example by our GitLab configuration in CI, where you can configure your test retries by your CI. As you see here in the GitLab YAML file, you can configure how many retries should be done when the job fails, and you can set when to retry. So for example, if there was a runner system failure, for example, when a job setup failed, I want to retry for 2 times. But remember, this one would be rerunning the job, not the flaky test alone. So you really need to think about using it. Well, if you want to just retry the flaky test, you can do it in your framework, at least if you work with Cypress. This is a Cypress implementation taken from version 5, where you can set the test retries in your Cypress JSON configuration file. Well, here you can configure the retry attempts in the test runner and in headless in run mode. Well, as you see, it's important to continuously hunt for flaky tests. And login is really, really helpful in that. So please think about using the addition to add purpose built diagnostic code so that you can see what actually happened inside of your test. The easiest one would be console log, so that you can inspect your application in browser console. For example, if you use the Cypress test runner, you have access to the browser dev tools, and so you can inspect console log output. Of course, you can use the command CY log itself for custom log entries in the test runner. Well, if you are going headless, that might be a bit more complex, but not that difficult. Cypress provides you a plugin to print out browser console output into your CI, so it might be useful to use that. And if you want, in CI in headless mode, turn on video recording to see what's happening inside of your test in the CI. But all those logging possibilities are not limited to end-to-end frameworks. I brought you a little example by a just unit test from Shopware, where I use console log to print out the components HTML to get a better grip on what's happening inside of my test. So there are really lots of possibilities to use logging for your advantage. All right. One of my other favorite topics for counter strategies of flakiness is the usage of the waiting features of your framework. And I cannot stress that enough. Never ever use fixed waiting times unless you have a good reason to do so. Consider using implicit waiting times instead. For example, waiting for changes in the UI by using resurgence, or wait for the API responses instead. Dynamically wait for the things happening inside of your app, not using fixed times. All right, these steps all helped me a lot in gaining back the trust in our test suite. And now, our test suite at Shopware seems to be quite stable right now. But of course, nothing is 100% perfect. I'm quite sure that there might be issues in the future. However, these strategies will help me to cope with that, so I'm quite confident that I would be able to fight those flaky test nightmares in the future. I hope I was able to lift the pain and concerns on flakiness from you as well, at least a bit, and to give you some starting points and strategies to cope with those problems in the future. Well, and then what else can I say then? Thank you. Thank you for taking your time and for listening to me. If you got questions on this topic or want to discuss some more courses or content strategies, please don't hesitate to come back to me after this talk at the conference, on Twitter, or wherever you want. I would be really glad to get better at this topic myself and to learn as a group. Until then, see you and take care.
Ramona, what an amazing talk. That's really interesting. We all suffer from not writing tests, and when we do suffer from having flaky tests that cause us more pain, which means we write less tests. So it's really great for you to share your experiences. We really appreciate that. I know I found it really interesting. Thank you so much. Everyone, do not forget to follow Ramona on social so you can keep up to date with all the awesome things going on there.